Hey everybody, looks like we already got some people waiting in the lobby. Thanks so much for joining today. So as advertised, we're going to be doing some ethical questions today. Again, I am getting familiar with the technology, so we will see how well it actually goes through in terms of me switching between reading these prompts, these scenarios that we're talking about, and then also coming back to the video and being able to discuss that. Yeah. Let me see if I can get all of these details. Yeah, let me get the chat popped up so that I can follow along with what you all are saying. I would also be interested in hearing, as we continue to discuss, what you all's thoughts are on the scenarios, what you would do in this hypothetical counselor situation, why you would do it. And so we're just going to talk through some of the values that counselors have and hold to, relying mostly on the ACA Code of Ethics. So that's the American Counseling Association. Other professional organizations have their own ethical codes. And of course, all of this is bound by Virginia state law or the state law of whatever state you're practicing in. So that's kind of my foundation for how I'm basing a lot of these decisions or discussions that I have about these different topics. So we can actually start with the one that I posted a couple of days ago, right? Let me pull it up real quick. If we go down to, sorry, switching between tabs. All right, so this was the example that I posted online. You're in session with a longtime client struggling with grief. You recently lost a loved one yourself, and during the session you briefly tear up. That part, totally fine. It may be something to consider for later if you're noticing that you're becoming very emotional during sessions, but you can't help your normal response. The client becomes concerned and asks, "Are you okay? Are you dealing with something too?" And you respond, "Honestly, I've had a hard time lately too. It's been a rough few weeks." Later, you worry that you've burdened the client emotionally or crossed a boundary. So, I saw some of people's thoughts on that, and it seemed like most people were okay with that person disclosing in this scenario. And I agree, it wasn't super over the top. It was honest, it was to the point. I think based on that short statement, if there was no follow-up to that, it was totally appropriate given the situation. You're using some immediacy, sharing how you're feeling, and that can be important to model with that particular client. But what you would be concerned about is if the roles got flipped somehow, so now that they were comforting you because you were having a rough time because they had triggered you somehow with their talk of losing a loved one. And so the important thing that we'll basically be discussing throughout this live is we're trying to be as intentional as possible with the choices that we make in these ethical scenarios so that it's not just purely based on reaction. There needs to be a certain reason why we are choosing to do so. And so if someone came back and asked, if someone somehow was able to get a video of that session, why did you do that? You could say, this was an opportunity for me to demonstrate authenticity with this client, to practice and model that immediacy of being able to share what I'm going through and to be honest about that. And so we could make an argument that that was beneficial for the client. I would personally tend to not do that, just because that's my style. I tend to be more of the blank slate kind of counselor where I'm just focused on their feelings and their emotions and their stories. But I can get that there's an advantage to being able to choose to do that intentionally and in appropriate doses so that that can be a model for the client, a way to build that relationship and show that you're a real person. That is something that supervisors in the past have encouraged me to do, is to bring more of myself into the session. And that is just, that's a stylistic choice on my part, not so much necessarily an ethical one, but just staying far away from that boundary can also protect you ethically. So that was that initial example that I posted. And yeah, I'm trying to follow along with the chat, but please feel free to also type in your comments about what you thought about that particular scenario also. So let's go over to this next scenario. An after-hours crisis and scope of practice. By the way, these were all written by ChatGPT, and I think it actually did a pretty good job with it. So shout out to ChatGPT for that. That was actually really helpful because I can't usually find sample ethical scenarios just on Google. All right, so you're locking up your solo practice office around 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday. So most of the way through the week, it's late, you've had a long day. A client you've seen for over a year, James, appears in the parking lot. He says he couldn't wait until next week and begins crying, explaining he's had intrusive thoughts of suicide but isn't planning anything yet. Well, that sounds threatening. You don't currently provide crisis services. Your practice policies state that clients in crisis should call 911 or a crisis line. James says he didn't want to call strangers and just needs you for a few minutes. You don't feel physically at risk, but you are alone and tired. Yeah, quick comment from Century says, I believe that I'm allowed to cry because at the end of the day, I'm human. Yeah, it's true. And this is not denying the humanity of counselors. This is more so that for the time being, there is a bit of a suspension of how human we're going to be in terms of just, this is not my time to have my emotions. But yeah, for this particular scenario, let's look at some of these factors again, all right? So it is after hours on a Thursday night. This person came to your workplace to find you and is already in a bad place, saying that he's had intrusive thoughts of suicide but isn't planning anything yet. So, okay, so also this is outside of the scope of your current practice. It says you currently do not provide crisis services. Your policies, which I assume means that this person, James, signed at the beginning of services with you, acknowledging that they understand that you do not provide crisis services. So that is one way to cover you in some way. Again, I'm not advocating this path necessarily, but you would be, I don't want to say within your rights. It would be understandable if you said, I need you to call crisis services because I don't provide crisis services currently. I understand you're in a difficult position, but because you have signed this paperwork beforehand stating that you understand the situation, this is the course of action that I need you to take. And so I think the downside of that is that comes off as unnecessarily harsh and abrupt. And that will have an impact. I think however you respond will have an impact on the counseling relationship if and when they come back for their next scheduled session. I think it's important to note that ChatGPT actually included that you don't feel physically at risk. If you felt physically at risk because this client accosted you in an emotionally vulnerable place in the parking lot at the end of the day when it's 7:30 and getting on towards nighttime, that might be a different story where you would maybe seek some intervention or to get out of the situation right away. But if we're going to assume that physical safety is not on your radar in terms of your sense of risk, then my thought would be, going back to this scenario, right? One of the values, of course, is that we are trying to do no harm, non-maleficence. And so I need to weigh what are the potential harms if I go down certain options. If I choose not to engage with him and just say, hey, you read the policies, you need to call a crisis line, that could potentially do harm to the counseling relationship and to this client by saying, I don't actually care about you when it's not the hour that you've actually paid for, and that you need to just follow the letter of the forms that you signed. The potential harm in choosing to engage with that and just say, hey, come on in, we can do an emergency session, whatever, is that you've potentially opened the door for greater dependence on you as a professional. And this depends on where they're at in treatment. If this is just a flare-up and they've kind of been with you for a while and been progressing well, maybe this is an opportunity for you to say, like, hey, we've talked about this. We've talked about potentially reaching out to a crisis line. I think this is an opportunity for us to practice what we've talked about in sessions before. That could be a benefit. So another value is doing good wherever possible, beneficence. Yeah, let me pause because I saw a couple of comments come in. All right, a knight says, I'd very kindly and caringly direct the person to crisis services. Good chance the client is lying when he said he's not planning anything. Generally, like if someone volunteers that, they're either very familiar with the suicide assessment process, which that by itself could be concerning, or that they are planning something and don't want to freak you out, which is not a good position to be in either for the client or the counselor. Century says, I'd help him regardless. Sorry if that sounds dumb, but I'm still learning. No, it's not dumb at all. I think a lot of people who go into the helping professions are going into them because they want to help people. And so this really tugs on the reason that a lot of people go into the counseling profession in the first place. So I get that that would be a very accessible kind of option if you say like, well, I'm here at the office anyway, and I don't have any more clients, then I might as well see you. I think you can make a case for that. That would certainly be the easiest argument to make from a beneficence standpoint in terms of doing good. They're right there. They're asking for help, and you can provide it. You are trained to do so, even if you don't currently provide that specific service. And so, yes, it would make sense to say, I would help him regardless. And so this is more of an urgent situation, right? You need to make a decision in the moment. My instinct would be to say, I currently don't provide crisis services, and I understand you're in a tough place. How about if I sit with you while we call 988 or while we call the local public mental health services emergency line? We can talk them through. We'll say that I'm here with you. If you need me to jump in and provide any kind of background information, I'm willing to do that with you, but let's make that call together. And so I'm trying to thread a needle here between providing that support, but not in the long term undermining this person's efficacy and independence in being able to seek and secure help and support for themselves. I would definitely say something along the lines of, hey, I appreciate that you thought to come to me to try to get that help. And so that's one thing. And then also that it's, well, what I would follow up in the following session would probably be like, hey, what if you went to the office and I wasn't there, I had left already, or maybe my earlier client hadn't shown up and I wasn't there, or any of those kinds of possibilities, thinking through like, hey, your mental health cannot rely solely on me. And so that would be if they were later on in their process with me, thinking through that, like, I'm glad that I was there to be able to sit with you and, whatever we decided to do, maybe I do a quick assessment or maybe encourage them to call, or maybe I just bring them in to talk, right? Regardless of that, I am not a 24/7 service, and there would be times, most likely, where you try to come in and I wouldn't be there. So what do we do in those cases? How can we practice that? How can we build that support for when I'm not available for you, which is likely a lot of the time? Yeah, absolutely. Centuries, I completely agree with you that it would be very irresponsible of me to just say, hey, you need to call the crisis line. I'm out. I'm going home. My day is done. That would definitely be a problem, especially since it'd be one thing if I didn't have any professional attachment to them. It was just some random person off the street. But being that this was my client, there is some ethical obligation to them. And it would actually, I think it would be the clearest case of I would be doing some harm if I absolutely refused to do anything because I was on my off hours. So that is what I've got for that first scenario. Let's see. There we go. Sorry, like I said, still working on the technology. All right. Social media. Everyone loves social media. Testimonials and dual roles. A former teenage client, Kayla, now 20, writes a heartfelt Google review of your counseling services. She describes how therapy changed her life and names you directly using real therapy details. This is a nightmare for a lot of therapists. She also tags your professional Instagram account and DMs you asking to catch up sometime, coffee maybe. You're aware that under Virginia law, even former clients are subject to ethical boundary rules. So we're getting a legal aspect here. In addition to that, I think probably ChatGPT wrote this with the average therapist in mind, who is most likely female. This would be a huge red flag if I were to respond to a 20-year-old female former client, as well as, what was her suggestion, going out to coffee later. That would be a huge problem, both personally and ethically. Kevin Toohey says, political ethics addressed on infrared on Kick Live soon. Okay, I don't know what that's about. Yeah, so going back to this scenario, man. So this is, first of all, why we're encouraged never to add or message or interact with our clients on social media, even former clients, because you put yourself into difficult situations. Now, if you do have a professional account and it's public, anyone can find you. It's the same as like if you have a website or if someone can leave a Google review. But yes, so I think the decision point here for me would be whether you choose to acknowledge or not that message. I think in my case, given that I'm a male therapist, I would choose not to respond and just act as if I hadn't seen it. They're not my current client. And so depending on the size of the place that I live in, that, I may or may not see this person again physically. And so based on just the potential legal and ethical risks, I would choose not to interact with this person online. I think it might be a little different if you're a female therapist and a former female client had reached out. It might be. There are probably a lot of female therapists who would just be in the same boat as me and not interact with this former client either. But yeah, you put yourself on some really shaky ground. I mean, if you chose to interact with them, if you chose to reply to the message, which again, I wouldn't, but if you chose to, I would say, thank you for the review. I'm concerned about the level of detail that you share just in terms of your confidentiality, and I'm not going to meet with you, but I do appreciate that you look back on our time fondly, or that you appreciated our work together. And I'd be directing that back at them. I do this a lot when I'm closing up with my clients and finishing up with their cases, talking about the work that they put in to get to that point. You worked a lot outside of session to make the progress that you now enjoy. So it was a privilege working with you. Thank you for that. So something like that, turning it back towards them instead of having the focus be on me in that communication. Let's see. Oh, unfortunately, I've seen therapy providers argue with former clients in Google reviews. That is a red flag. I would not want to do that either. Andy says it's a tricky situation with a former client had a similar thing happen last year and chose to avoid the interaction. Yeah. I think, I'm curious what you all think. If it were a current client, would that make it better or worse? My instinct is that it would probably make it worse, because then you have less of an option to actually ignore them. Yeah, if it's a former client, you don't have any standing appointments to see them in the future, and so if you ignore them, maybe they could chalk it up to an oversight. If they are a current client and started messaging you like that, I don't think you could ignore it because they could just call you on it the next time they see you. And then that's got its own issues in terms of non-maleficence. Am I doing harm by ignoring them? Do they think that I'm ashamed of them? All that kind of stuff. And if they were trying to meet outside of clinical hours, then I would just say like, hey, we have a professional client and counselor relationship, and let's just reserve our conversations for when we're meeting in person and when you're at the office, and that would kind of be the end of it, I think. Andy, you have run into too many of these situations. I am sorry for that, and I'm glad that these are mostly hypothetical for me, and it sounds like you've had to deal with a lot of it. Oh, I see. Yeah, working with borderline personality disorder population. That would make sense. Amanda says, seems like it would feel even more awkward if they were a current client. That was my inclination, but I think maybe initially more awkward. Long term, you probably have a hard conversation, and that should be the end of it. Yeah, let me go to our next one. I'm trying to move through these at a good clip. Couples therapy and the confidential affair. First of all, this is why I don't prefer to do couples therapy. I get the arguments for doing that in situations where you're working on a relationship when it's not just a one person's problem. But yeah, this stuff gets messy fast, especially in terms of insurance, because you can only bill one person, so one person is the identified client. Anyways, you're treating a married couple, Lisa and Marcus, for communication and trust issues. Well, that's not boding well. Before a joint session, Lisa requests an individual check-in. If that's not typical, I would have my radar going already. During that time, she discloses an affair from a few months prior and makes you promise not to tell Marcus. That's always a red flag. She insists it would ruin everything and wants to continue therapy as if nothing happened. I have thoughts about that line of thinking as well. You had both Lisa and Marcus sign a couples counseling informed consent at the beginning of treatment, which includes a clause that information disclosed individually may not remain confidential if it affects the couples therapy process. I think we can make an argument that an affair would affect their couples therapy process. So the good thing about this scenario is that you've had them sign the paperwork in advance. They are ostensibly aware of that condition, that information disclosed confidentially may not remain just between you and the therapist, because that can lead to triangulation, issues of that, and keeping secrets for one person to the detriment of another. So that's difficult. In terms of, so it helps that you've had them sign the form, so you have that to fall back on. Like, hey, remember this form that we signed? You can pull it out, it has their signature on it. Based on what you're telling me, I think it's fair to say that if we're working on trust, the knowledge of this affair can affect the process that you all are working on in terms of that trust and building that relationship and communication and trust, all of those things. And so the way I would handle it is I would first remind her of that document. I think I would try to ask her questions. How do you think this affects trust? I think there's an assumption that it would affect trust there. And so that falls under the umbrella of like, this is what we're working on. So this is relevant to the therapy process that you all are going through. And this would probably be where I would challenge her to say like, hey, I think this is something that you need to talk to, Marcus, about, especially based on the trust that you say you're trying to build in the relationship. If we continue to build on this therapy process and I kept the secret for you, that is not developing real trust within the relationship that you all are talking about, and it has the potential to fall apart at any time because of this secret that you would want me to keep. And so I am willing to be in the room with you to help facilitate that conversation, to use some of the skills that we've discussed to be able to have that conversation in as healthy a way as possible. But I do think that you need to share this with him. And of course the difficulty is probably going to be that she doesn't want to, because she asked me to keep the secret in the first place. And so that would be something that I definitely consult with my MFT colleagues about. And then also having further conversations. So this is difficult because now I'm on a separate process already with this woman, Lisa, because she's got her own issue around that. And I am not willing to just involve Marcus just out of not being willing to keep a secret. I think that would do more harm for me to break that confidentiality and tell Marcus without Lisa's consent. And so my ideal situation would be I offer, hey, let me be in the room with you all if you would like to have me there. And you can tell him and we'll talk about it after you admit that or confess that to him. Difficult situation all around anyway. But that would be how I would ideally handle it. There have been situations, though, where I've had to say, like, I cannot keep the secret. I'm not going to break your confidentiality, but I think it would be better if you saw someone else. Maybe if you want to see an individual counselor and you can talk to them about that or work through that. It's a tricky situation for sure. But there have definitely been times where colleagues of mine have had to discontinue working with a couple because of situations like that, because they were getting pulled into a triangle and it was not going to end well. Okay, a lot of comments to catch up on. Social media ethics course. Okay. I would tell the affair, yeah. Yeah, like Andy's right. I don't want to be stuck in the middle of this kind of thing. But generally when I approach couples, I want all cards on the table as much as possible, because that just keeps people from being in difficult situations, not just me, but also for either spouse. Hey, Jose, thanks for joining. Let me go to our next... all right. Confidentiality with a minor in school-based counseling. You've contracted as a school-based therapist through a community agency. Okay, that's already a lot of different professional mix-ups. So you're contracted as a school-based therapist. So you are not employed by the school. You are employed by the community agency. So whether that's a private or a public one, I guess it doesn't say. A 15-year-old student, Brianna, confides in you that she's been vaping and drinking on weekends with friends. Okay, both illegal. But insists she is safe and in control. By definition, not true, because she is at legal risk. She begs you not to tell her parents. Oh, great. Another confidentiality piece. Fearing they'll pull her from school and punish her harshly. There's no evidence of current abuse or danger. Let's see. Okay, so that's no evidence of current abuse or danger of the drugs? I would argue that it's abuse because she's using them illegally. So I've got a problem with this prompt. The school principal who knows you work with Brianna privately asked for an update, especially regarding any risky behaviors. Okay, so two confidentiality issues here. One, you have a nosy principal, and the other, you have the teen not wanting to tell the parent. Okay, this is another situation where I would probably be encouraging the client very strongly to tell the parent. I think strictly legally, I probably would not be able to disclose to the parents. What is it? CFR. Oh man, I'm gonna have to look this up. CFR. 42 CFR, that's what it is. Man. Yes, 42 CFR protects the confidentiality of people who are struggling with substance use. And so I think that applies. She's 15 years old. Okay. So anyone who has sought treatment for or been diagnosed with substance use disorder at a federally assisted program. So this is going to depend on... Okay, so people are talking about it. It might be abuse at home. Okay, I can see that as well. So I wasn't sure how they were using it exactly. No evidence of current abuse or danger. Okay, so my thoughts initially, I would check with a supervisor or a colleague, consult about the legality issue, because there might actually be a legal concern here that supersedes any ethical obligations. Well, so breaking confidentiality in that case is going to be very unlikely. Again, that kind of depends on the source of funding. If you're a public mental health institution, it is very likely that you receive some form of federal funds, and so you would be subject to 42 CFR in that case. If you're not, maybe you have a little more latitude. But this is, again, a situation where I would want to encourage the client to be communicating this with her parents. She is unlikely to do so. Oh, sorry, a knight is sharing a story, so I'll let them finish typing that while I keep talking. So yeah, I think 42 CFR was initially designed for people to seek help with substance abuse and substance use disorders without fear of, I don't know if you want to call it like retribution or consequences from their parents, that they don't want to be too scared to reach out for help. Andy makes a good point. If the client were willing to discuss that with her parents, that would be something I would encourage. Like, hey, let's bring your parents in, and I can be here as you share that with them. We'll talk about the situation, what you're willing to share, what you're not willing to share, and let's map out this conversation so that you can feel like you're sharing it on your own terms, but that I think your parents need to know, because I'm concerned for your safety, or I'm concerned that you are using these substances. And I guess, it would depend on, why she feels like she needs to use them as well. Because that could indicate maybe some co-occurring disorders that maybe she's trying to self-medicate in some way, shape, or form. Or, it's hard to speculate based on a lack of information about the background of the case. But, the school principal piece, that is more so on the policies that you have signed as a contracted therapist through the community agency. So in that setting, I believe that your agency's policies would take primacy if they diverge from the school's policies. I would tend to think that the confidentiality would basically go through, okay, so I'm not a school therapist, so I don't know all the regulations about this. I don't know if you were a school therapist hired by the county, if the confidentiality umbrella extends to the principal or like administrative staff, or if you have kind of that exclusive confidentiality that you don't have to share with a principal who asks. Or there might be certain conditions that have to be met for you to break confidentiality with the school principal. In this situation, I would tend to think that your confidentiality kind of runs through your community agency. But again, I'm not a school counselor. I haven't had training in that area, so that's very hard for me to say. Oh, okay. Sorry, I am not keeping up with the thread of the conversation really well. Centuries says, I'm already under a lot of stress as a regular therapist and now a student and a principal, and the student wants me to keep it a secret. I don't know what to do. That's kind of where I'm at right now. Only the regular terms of harm or abuse. Oh, okay, I got you. Okay, so Andy seems a little more familiar with this potential kind of situation. So the same kind of exceptions to confidentiality seem to apply within the school environment, as well as just the regular outside of school environment. All right. I did not care for that one. All right. This is the last one we're doing today. Cultural misunderstanding or ethical breach. A new immigrant client from West Africa, Mr. Io, insists on paying you in cash and bringing food from his restaurant at each session. While I appreciate different foods, this is already setting up for a very difficult situation, I can imagine. Despite your no gift policy in your informed consent paperwork, he becomes visibly offended when you try to decline, saying, in my culture, you cannot help someone and refuse their thanks. That cultural competency is one of the values that the ACA does like to push. And so this is butting up against the dual relationships, stuff about accepting gifts, because again, like when you're talking about gifts, then you need to determine like what's the monetary value. Are you taking advantage of the client? Are you gaining more than is appropriate, which is basically your stated compensation from the client? Are you gaining an advantage from the client with apparently this cultural value that this immigrant client has, that if they thank you because you are helping them, you cannot refuse, and you stand to really offend them by doing so. So you're concerned about boundaries, understandably, especially since he occasionally underpays and says he'll make it up next time with extra stew. Centuries, I think you're being too hard on yourself. I'm trying to model that I am really struggling with these as well. So these are difficult situations. Andy seems to be the only one who deals with them regularly. So good for you, Andy. Maybe you can you can do this next time. But yeah, Amanda, you're totally right. These are really difficult situations, and they're people situations. If it was like a robot or you're dealing with machines, you can leave some of the feelings and the different assumptions and stuff out of the picture, and that would make it a lot simpler. Poisoned food. Freya, you are operating on a different level than me. We're going to assume the food is good and I enjoy eating it, but now you're getting into a situation where you're basically doing the bartering thing, that you are accepting less or no pay in exchange for the food in this case, but it can be gifts or it can be services, that kind of thing. And it gets really tricky because money you can refund. Food you really can't. And there's a defined value to the money that you receive. And so you say, an hour of my time is worth X amount of dollars. So they pay that. It's all agreed upon. And now if you start the bartering thing, you're in a more nebulous territory. Someone might feel more taken advantage of. And so there's a possibility for me to say, hey, I'm in this to make money. Like, I need to feed my family. I can't just feed them off of the food that you bring to session. Or I need to pay my mortgage. I can't pay that in stew. And so that is definitely something that could develop into resentment for me if I say, this guy's underpaying. I don't feel like I can call him on it because he's so thankful and appreciative. And so that can absolutely lead to some friction in our counseling relationship. If I choose to refuse and say, hey, I just need you to pay, which is like the stated policy, right? Like under normal circumstances, you probably say, hey, you just need to pay. If you can't pay, then we need to talk about that and figure something else out. But now if I'm pushing on that, that potentially violates his cultural norms and also could lead to a rupture within the counseling relationship. Man, it seems like a lot of people have run into this kind of situation before, and not even just in the counseling environment. Yeah, so I think Andy makes a good point. If he is consistently underpaying and trying to make it up with food, I would say, hey, it seems like the financial piece is difficult for you. I don't want that to be an impediment to you receiving services. Let's talk about what is workable for you so that you don't feel obligated to bring me food. And so different companies will usually have a policy on like how much is appropriate for like the relative value of a gift, because we understand that some people will give gifts and it might not be worth making a big stink over like a $5 thing. If they're giving you hundreds of dollars in cash as an extra or something, like I haven't had that happen, but like just as an example, or buying you a new laptop or something, that is absolutely something that you need to be very wary of accepting. I'd say a lot of people would probably say don't accept it at all. In the case though, like I don't know how much the stew costs. Like if we assume it's like maybe $5 or less, since inflation, maybe $6 or $7 or less. Yeah. I would say address the financial issue. If he's having trouble paying consistently, we need to talk about that separately. And then understanding that within my profession, I am trying to keep it professional. I am providing a service for you, and I appreciate your kindness in showing your thankfulness and bringing the food. Please don't feel like you need to do so every time. I understand your thankfulness and I receive it as such. But yeah, I don't want him to get into the pattern of feeling like this is part of his payment to receive these services. And so a lot of that is just trying to navigate and communicate as clearly as possible. I am not expecting this. I appreciate that you do it, and I am trying to respect your culture as well. But also please don't see this as part of your payment to be able to receive my services. Oh, yeah. When kids want either buy you a gift or make you a gift, those policies can absolutely be rough. Or like, what if they bake something for you? Like, that's really difficult to turn down, because like they can't just like return that to a store. Yes. Yeah, and he says inviting him to share about his culture could be helpful. Yeah, I think in all of this, a lot of it is understanding what values you're trying to uphold. And a lot of times agencies will have policies that kind of guide that. And so you have kind of a base to start on. But there are times when the policy doesn't cover everything, or the policy is wrong too. And so I think the important thing is that you need to assume that you have to defend the decision at some point. So recognizing that it's a potentially sticky ethical situation, thinking through the potential values that are in play here and how you might move towards each of those values, consulting with a colleague or a supervisor, depending on your role within the organization, and then going the route that you decide brings the most benefit and offers the least harm. Because yeah, some of these there isn't like 100% correct answer. There are probably going to be people who act differently in most of these scenarios compared to what I said. But thinking through and being able to defend your decision, saying you consulted with people and they concurred that you've considered the factors and this is the best that you could do in that situation. So yeah, it's hard. I think just making the decision not reactively out of, our own feelings about the situation, like with the client who shows up at 7:30 p.m. outside of a scheduled appointment, our initial instinct might be, oh, I want to help this guy. This is why I got into the field in the first place. But also recognizing if I choose to do that isn't just about my feelings, or is it actually providing a benefit to the client? Have I thought through the potential costs of that? Yes, documenting, write it down, write down your justifications, write down your conversations, what you considered, all of those kinds of things, super important. Centuries is being very hard on themselves. And so look, we're having this discussion because these are not easy questions. It is not, plug it into these values, you'll get one definite answer and everyone else is wrong. It's following a process that you can repeat each time so that you're making the best out of a bad situation. Not bad necessarily, but like risky, potentially risky. So this is not about someone being smart enough to handle it. It's the intentionality behind the decisions that we make. And so, this is not to scare off anybody who's in the helping professions. This is definitely like, if you are a client, don't do any of these things, please. That would be helpful for us on the professional side of things. But we get that happens, and that's why we have continuing education requirements. In Virginia, you have to do at least 3 hours of continuing education with ethics every year, and there's a bunch of courses in grad school that you have to take about ethics as well. So it's super important, and that's why we do this, because we understand that we're in a position where we can cause a lot of harm if we don't take it seriously, if we don't think through these ethical issues and just do whatever we think is right. Our first instinct is not always right. And so that's why we need to train that, like Andy was talking about. We need to practice and develop that skill so that when these things come up, that we're not just flailing about for a good answer. So that's what I've got for you all tonight. Let me talk a little bit about what we've got coming down the line really quick, and then we'll finish up for today. So there is a new communities thing that YouTube is pushing that I just got an email about recently. I guess there was always a community tab, but it seems like now you can post within that community, so it's not just I post something and you can respond to it. So go ahead and check that out, play with it. If it's not there for whatever reason, I thought I enabled it, go ahead and let me know. You can DM me on Instagram or you can email me. Let me know that you can't post on the community. But that was definitely what YouTube was telling me can happen. Other than that, video coming out this coming Saturday. Oh, this is a video about why I call my people clients instead of patients. There was somebody who commented on one of my shorts saying that, don't trust any therapist who calls you a client because they just see you as a source of income and they're not actually going to be wanting to help you. So I talk a little bit about that, why I use the term clients, and why I think that's the right term to use instead of patients. So that's coming out this Saturday. Next Saturday, I just filmed for today, so I'm actually a little ahead of things right now, which is a great feeling. It's going to be another Psych2Go reaction. This one I thought was a little better. This was their 6 things, some number of things not to say to someone who is suicidal. And so I'm doing a reaction to that video. So I'm in the process of editing that now. But yeah, those are the videos I have planned. There are still some interviews that I am trying to book with different people. So I'll announce those as those come up. I do hope that you all enjoy the interviews. I know they get fewer views. So that's what I'm trying to weigh, because I think those are some really valuable conversations, especially because it's bringing in insight and expertise that's outside of myself. And I always make sure to claim that I do not know everything, and I shouldn't be seen as somebody who knows everything. And so that's why I try to bring in other perspectives. So it's a balance. I try not to do it too much because I do want the views as well, but also that like this platform is to engage and to inform, and so by necessity I need to bring in other perspectives. So I'll keep doing that. Those are important videos to film anyway. Top thing not to say, just do it. Yeah, Andy, I hope that goes without saying sometimes. Amanda, thank you. I do think that the interviews are enjoyable because, like, well, first of all, you guys might be tired of my voice sometimes and tired of my perspectives too. So it's helpful to bring in other people. Yeah, I'll try to think of ways to maybe market those a little better. Chicago Med Monday morning. All right, I can check it out. Here, I got something to write with. I'll write it down. I don't know the show, but I can definitely check it out and see if I'm feeling inspired enough to do a reaction. Usually I can find something to talk about. But yeah, so those are the videos that I've got coming down the line. If you have any other ideas for interviews or topics, as usual, please do email or DM them to me on Instagram. I have a couple of potential partnerships and promos in the works, but nothing solid yet, so I'm not going to announce that. But I am excited about that. Some places have been reaching out, so once I have news about that, I'll let you all know. I am definitely working to always secure discount codes for you all, things like that, so be on the lookout. I'm lucky scared of you. Yeah, Andy, you did get a lot of pushback on some of your views after your interview, so I'm glad that you're willing to come back and at least watch a live stream and discuss. But yeah, there are a wide range of opinions on every interview, especially, but I think just all the videos too. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining. I really do appreciate you all watching and tuning in for your input on some of these really difficult scenarios. Again, this is not something that anyone should expect to just understand and be able to get the right answer right away. This is something that we're practicing and talking about together. Even if you're not a professional, I think it's an interesting topic regardless. But so thank you all so much for watching.